All right, ladies and gentlemen, the 2025 NFL Draft is officially in the books, and boy, do we have a lot of interesting takeaways from day 3. Let's start with some quarterback news because we saw a ton of them get selected, including, yes, even Shedeur Sanders. Finally, before we get to that, though, we actually had a trade involving a quarterback, and that would be Sam Howell, the former Commander/Seahawk, is headed to Minnesota after the Vikings traded Seattle pick 142 for Sam Howell and pick 172. Howell became pretty expendable after the Seahawks signed Sam Darnold and Drew Lock, and then took Jalen Milroe in the 3rd round of the draft. The Vikings, meanwhile, were in need of a backup, as J.J. McCarthy and Brett Rippon were the only 2 quarterbacks on the roster before today. Now, let's get to what has undoubtedly become the biggest story of draft weekend, and that is Shedeur Sanders. The wait is over. He has been drafted by the Cleveland Browns. They made him the first quarterback taken in day 3 at pick 144 in the 5th round. But believe it or not, this isn't even the first quarterback they drafted in this year's draft. It's a very odd, fascinating situation for a couple of reasons. They drafted Dillon Gabriel yesterday in the 3rd round. So after they took him, everyone kind of thought they were out of the Shedeur conversations, and understandably so. But nope. They then took Shedeur and successfully pulled off one of the weirdest drafts of all time. Not only did they draft 2 quarterbacks, but they also drafted 2 running backs as well. They took Quinshot Judkins early in the 2nd round. They then went with Tennessee's running back Dylan Sampson later in the 4th. And get this, the Browns are now the first team in the common draft era to take 2 quarterbacks and 2 running backs in the first 5 rounds of the NFL draft. They have no idea what they're doing. But going back to their quarterback situation, I'm really intrigued to see how this pans out for them. They obviously have Deshaun Watson, but he's likely missing all of 2025 after rupturing his Achilles twice. They then brought in Joe Flacco on a 1-year deal and traded for Kenny Pickett, and then, of course, drafted not 1, but 2 quarterbacks in this year's draft. GM Andrew Berry said today that Shedeur still being there in the 5th round was simply too much of a value to pass up. They want as much competition in the QB room as possible, and so there you have it. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if they roll into training camp with Joe Flacco as QB1, but make camp a bit of a competition for the starting role. With 5 QBs now under contract, though, and 4 of them healthy heading into the season, could Shedeur Sanders start his NFL career as QB4? He certainly has an uphill climb to make some noise in the NFL, but it's not impossible. Check this out. Throughout the history of the NFL, 9 quarterbacks have made multiple Pro Bowls that were day 3 picks in the draft. And that's not including Brock Purdy, who will probably make this list soon. And then I also should mention that undrafted quarterbacks like Tony Romo and Kurt Warner have managed to pull this off as well. And speaking of Shedeur, his brother Shiloh, who plays safety, did go undrafted, but he actually ended up signing as a UDFA with the Buccaneers. So pretty cool to see him get an opportunity somewhere, and I do wish him the best. You know who else I wish the best for? Anybody trying to block this behemoth of a man. Meet Desmond Watson, defensive tackle out of Florida. He's 6'6" and 464 pounds. Yes, you heard that right. He was the biggest player in this year's draft class, and while he didn't actually get drafted, he, just like Shiloh Sanders, signed as a UDFA with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's been given the nickname the Tush Push Terminator, which is actually hilarious. But if anybody can stop the tush push, it's got to be this guy. So someone give this man a pizza during pregame warmups and let's ride. Anyway, before I get back to the QB talk, I actually wanted to highlight the New England Patriots for a second because they made a couple of, let's just say, interesting picks on day 3. They took the first kicker out of any team, drafting Andy Borealis in the 6th round, but they weren't done there. In the 7th round, they went ahead and took long snapper Julian Ashby. If you're confused, you have every right to be. That was the first long snapper to get drafted since 2021. Dane Brugler even shouted out the Patriots for making things interesting late. He said New England took his 5th ranked long snapper and then his 120-something ranked cornerback. What on earth is going on over there? But back to the quarterbacks, because aside from the Browns, another team in the AFC North made a splash at QB today. And that was the Pittsburgh Steelers. They ended up taking Ohio State QB Will Howard in the 6th round. He's an intriguing prospect as he's coming off of an incredible final year of college. He threw for over 4,000 yards and 35 touchdowns while completing an absurd 73% of his passes. He, of course, also led Ohio State to a national championship, so he's definitely played in some big games. Pittsburgh is in quite an interesting place here, as their current quarterback room looks as follows. Mason Rudolph, who they just signed back to the team on a 2-year deal, Skylar Thompson, who has been a career backup, and now 6th-round pick Will Howard. Not the sexiest QB room, but you better believe they're still holding on to the hope that Aaron Rodgers decides to sign with them. Team owner Art Rooney II appeared on a local Pittsburgh radio show and recently said, quote, "We're still kind of getting the same signals that we've been getting recently. He does want to come here, so I do think we may get word soon." Then Mike Tomlin said himself that the two sides have had productive talks, though he isn't ready to forecast if and when a deal gets done. And then, believe it or not, but the Cleveland Browns weren't the only team to take 2 quarterbacks in this year's draft. The Las Vegas Raiders were so inspired by their blueprint of success that they took Montana State quarterback / wide receiver Tommy Mellott at pick 213. Then just 2 picks later, they took North Dakota State quarterback Cam Miller. Now, what's actually crazy about this is that these two guys played each other in the FCS National Championship game last year, with North Dakota State getting the W 35-32 behind 4 total touchdowns and over 300 total yards from Cam Miller. It's worth noting that Mellott could very well transition to wide receiver in the NFL. Some believe he doesn't have the size or arm strength to continue playing QB at the NFL level, but his athleticism could help him translate to receiver. Just check out his relative athletic score. His height and weight are subpar for a QB, but he has elite athleticism across the board, even running a 4.39 40. Now, this has the Raiders in an interesting spot at quarterback too. They have Geno Smith, of course, but there were some reports floating around that they might want to get rid of Aiden O'Connell, and now you have 2 more added to the list, although it's kind of like 3.5 at this point in time. 3.5 meaning Geno, Aiden O'Connell, and then the 2 they just drafted. Now, on top of all those guys I just mentioned, there were several other quarterbacks taken as well. Syracuse QB Kyler McCord went to the Eagles in the 6th round. Notre Dame quarterback Riley Leonard got taken 8 picks later by the Colts. Graham Mertz out of Florida went to the Texans at a 197. Curtis Rourke from Indiana went in the 7th to the Niners. Then Texas QB Quinn Ewers was the last quarterback taken, and he went to the Miami Dolphins at pick 231 in the 7th round. Time will tell what comes of all these guys, but typically if you're a 6th or a 7th round pick, you're just hoping to carve out a respectable career as a backup at least. And while this was considered a weaker quarterback class, it was hyped as one of the strongest running back classes we've seen in recent years. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I did want to highlight a couple of the day 3 running backs that I think landed in some pretty interesting spots. The first I want to talk about is Cam Skattebo. Dane Brugler had a 3rd to 4th round grade on him, and he ended up being the 3rd pick of the 4th round to the New York Giants. He's coming off of a monster final year at ASU, rushing for over 1,700 yards and 21 touchdowns while catching 45 passes for another 600 yards and 3 touchdowns. Don't know why my voice got that high, but it is what it is. He's a versatile back who's considered an elite pass catcher out of the backfield and could be a solid weapon for the Giants offense. They just took Tyrone Tracy Jr. in the 5th round of last year's draft, and he did emerge as the leader in that backfield by the end of the year. So now add Skattebo to that backfield, and I actually like that quite a bit. Another pick that was a favorite of mine was the Saints taking Kansas running back Devin Neal in the 6th round. The reason I like it is because it's tremendous value for them. Dane Brugler gave him a 4th round grade on his draft guide, but instead the Saints got him at pick 184. Alvin Kamara is under contract for 2 more seasons, but he's not getting any younger. He'll be 30 years old by the start of the season. They did sign Clyde Edwards-Helaire and have Kendre Miller, who they drafted in the 3rd round back in 2023, but neither of them have shown they can be a full-time starter at this point in their careers. Time will tell if Devin Neal can be a starter, but at the very least, he's going to be a solid depth piece, and maybe after he develops for a year or 2, he can take over the backfield for Alvin Kamara. Those were just a couple of the picks that I loved personally, but you guys got to let me know what some of your favorite picks of day 3 were, or the entire draft for that matter, and then let me know what you make of Shedeur Sanders landing with the Cleveland Browns. Do you like it? Hate it? Let me know either way in the comments down below. And with that, can I get a